let's get into these findings. So after all of that was done, so for research question 1, about how fat women perceive their sexual experiences in the context of their weight and size. Physical issues was the first theme that got identified. And that was about practical considerations. So that reflected a pattern of physical, practical, or mechanical challenges in navigating an obese body in a sexual environment. I could see how often I'm actually going in and out of saying obese or fat, and I want to name that and say that my intention is to try and use the word fat, and that is what I want to use. And well, maybe like James Corden, I'm still used to some of the language in the research and from working at the bariatric clinic out of a medical model. And so that's tough to break. And I'm certainly going to keep doing my best and trying to reflect on that too. So the first theme around just the mechanical challenges. So like certain sexual positions were perceived as impossible because of their physical bodies. So one participant, so I made acronyms for all of them, or just AA or BB or CC or something like that for each of the participants. One participant noted, there's no way, like I'd love to be on the top, but my knees don't allow it. Another participant said, when you're heavier, you can't move the same way and you can't hold your legs up the same way if you're heavy. The second theme out of this first research question was called sexual inhibition, limiting sexuality because of weight concerns. This reflected a pattern of perceptions that fat had inhibited participants' sexual behaviors and experiences, especially as it related to dating. So one participant said, I just may not participate in sex at all and say stop my partner from like touching me in a certain spot like my stomach. There was a lack of agreement between the survey data, so the body appreciation scale 2, and what was learned in the interviews in research question 1. So interview responses contained a lot more negative than positive responses about the influence of weight on their sexual experiences. But the survey responses contained a much more positive than negative response about body appreciation. So we'll need to talk more about what that means in a bit. For research question 2, how do fat women perceive the cultural messages about their bodies and sexuality? So the first theme that came from that was invisibility is a cultural directive. So it reflected participants' perceptions of a pattern of a lack of positive representation of fat women in society. One participant said, there are no overweight people in media that are heroes, or almost none. There are no fat women that are heroes. The second theme that emerged from this question was called change in attitudes at a glacial pace. So that reflected a pattern of participants perceiving very modest cultural changes in the representation of fat individuals, but at a very, very slow rate. One participant said, you hear it all over the place. You know, you see it on ads, you see it on the TV, movies. This is what people should look like. But I think I'm kind of optimistic that people are changing the kind of mindset of what overweight is. During member checking, the participants said that they agreed that some positive cultural messages could be identified, but that much more progress was needed. For research question 3, how do fat women struggle differently with perceptions about their sexual enjoyment and satisfaction? 3 themes came out of this research question. The first theme was called feelings of attractiveness. So this reflected a pattern of how participants' perceptions of attractiveness influence their sexual experiences. If a participant felt attractive in some way, their sexual experiences were less inhibited. It also emerged that participants' ideas of attractiveness were influenced by cultural messages, messages from parents and messages from themselves. One participant described her experience as, I just don't feel attractive, and it's a lot harder to get into sex and into having sex if I don't feel attractive. The second theme that emerged from this question was called feelings of confidence. And that reflected a pattern of participants' perceptions of confidence influencing their sexual experiences. When they felt confident in their bodies in some way, they described less inhibited sexual experiences. For example, for one participant, when she discussed her weight loss experience, she said, I know 100% my confidence is higher. The third theme identified in this research question was that parental messages regarding weight, fat, and obesity seem to correlate with the body appreciation scale responses. So in all participants, remember there's only 10, the amount of agreement with the body appreciation statements reflected the participants' statements of their perceptions of their parents' attitudes about fat. So for example, one participant said, my dad actually would, I remember him commenting, no one's going to want to marry you if you're fat. In terms of her responses on the body appreciation survey, she had 6 responses of disagreement and 4 responses of agreement around body appreciation. So more disagreement, and that was correlated with messages from parents that were more negative around fat and obesity. So, but there is still this underlying issue that in the body appreciation survey, most of overall clients had, or participants had, a higher degree of body appreciation than what they were talking about in the interviews. So they were naming body appreciation on the survey, but they were not actually reflecting that in the interviews and what they were saying. So what was so fascinating here was that the more harmful the messages about fat or obesity, or the more fat phobic the messages, the more about dieting that were present in a child's upbringing, the less they appreciated their body as an adult. And that was consistent kind of no matter what else was going on, which was remarkable. Again, this is only a sample of 10 women, but it was remarkable to see that correlation be so true. So one of the conclusions there is that body appreciation is somewhat independent of participants' perceptions of sexual experiences. So body appreciation may not be exactly what is being used to help fat women. Body appreciation is not the mechanism that seems to be helpful, at least in terms of this, in terms of these findings. So when we evaluate the findings, just looking at the different research questions, just to kind of bring attention to how it relates to what's already out there in the research and the literature. So the first theme was really consistent with bariatric surgery research that had found that obesity can restrict sexual intercourse positions. But that was the only area that I found that they talked about it. And of course, from a bariatric surgery perspective, it was all about the negative impacts of weight. So it's always going towards the negatives there. For research question 2, those results, that theme of sexual inhibition or limiting sexuality because of weight concerns, is also consistent with other research that's found a restriction of dating and sexual experiences for younger females with obesity, or they're fat women. These findings support objectification theory's supposition that socialization to thin appearance ideals begins at a very young age. And when we're looking at all of the fat phobia content out of culture and how after television came and mass social media, we are inundated with these messages. And so these messages are becoming highly internalized and then passed down in an oral tradition within the family or the culture of the family around being scared of ending up fat. Remember that Bridget Jones's Diary, that intro part? Like that is like, I was just 20 or so when that movie came out. And I remember that being like a big cultural force. Like that was what women were scared of. That being that, you know, the just winding up dead and nobody there to love you because you're not the right shape or you're not the right size, or you don't look the right way, the way that our heteronormative culture has decided is normative. The third research question was interesting to compare with the previous research, because most of what the research was talking about was things that were very negative. So constructs like body image, shame, stigma, those were not the words that the participants used. Participants didn't really go to those kind of constructs. The words that they used that fit for them was attractiveness and confidence. And so it was interesting to compare that, because in my mind, it looks like the literature has always been looking at from a negative aspect of it, what you don't want. And participants are naturally talking about what they do want: attractiveness, confidence, not spontaneously talking about things like shame and stigma or using those same kind of constructs, even though it's embedded in it. So there's different language. And so perhaps the language of the existing literature and research is not as helpful to us really understanding what's going on with women and fat women, or at least there needs to be more investigation into that. So the last theme, though, was also really consistent with some previous research, that females are more likely to display negative stereotypes towards obesity or fat if their parents emphasized the thin ideal and losing weight in childhood. And so if we have a client who's like around 40 years old or so, and when we look at understanding how fat phobia has evolved, and then putting them at a place where, okay, so if they were born around 1980, that means that the influence that their parents were going through at that time in the culture about fat phobia was very extreme. And so it gets passed down. Basically, another way of saying an intergenerational transmission of trauma through the generations. This imperative of, we have to look a certain way, we have to lose weight, fat is bad. And in some ways, I know that parents were also doing that to try and protect their kids. Like, I know what the world is going to be like for a fat person. I don't want you to have to experience that. The only problem is, instead of acceptance, there was still a threat of rejection of, you are the one who needs to change here. You need to change in order to fit into society, or your life is going to be really hard. And that somehow that is achievable to be able to put yourself into some kind of role, this box that's already been created for you, which is not actually maybe true for what that individual wants or needs, or what their body's even telling them about what they want or need.